The clock marked 4:30 in the morning when Luz Marina quietly got up, her body tired and her gaze still lost in the shadows of the room. The cold floor greeted her as it did every day, reminding her that time never stops, even if the soul sometimes does. She opened the window to let in a little air, and the dawn filtered through the curtains with the shyness of one who does not want to awaken memories. On the table there was a cup of reheated coffee and a pair of worn-out shoes that still held the dust of the hardest days of her life. It was her invisible uniform, the one worn by women who worked while others slept. Luz Marina had spent months looking for a job. In every interview she found the same look, a mixture of compassion and distrust. At 56, with skin marked by the sun and hands hardened by years of effort, most no longer saw a worker in her, but a memory of what they did not want to become. But that Monday something had changed. A brief call, a hurried voice on the other end of the phone, and the promise of a position at a downtown company. General cleaning service, morning shift, base salary, uniform included. It wasn't much, but to Luz it sounded second chance. She dressed carefully. She ironed a white blouse that no longer shone and smoothed her blue skirt with her hands. In the mirror, for an instant, she thought she saw the young woman she had been, the one who dreamed of studying and changing the world. Now, her greatest hope was to secure a stable contract and send some money to her daughter Valeria. They hadn't spoken for months. The last conversation had ended with a silence that still weighed heavily on Luz's heart. But deep down, she still thought of her with tenderness, with the patience of a mother who holds no grudge, even if the world demands it. Upon arriving at the building, the dawn light bounced off the glass facade, making everything seem bigger than it was. The reception smelled of expensive perfume and disinfectant. The cleaning team women gathered in a corner, distributing shifts and materials. Luz listened in silence, trying to memorize the hallways, the names, the unwritten rules. They handed her a bucket, a mop, and an ID badge with her full name written in small letters. Luz Marina Ochoa, Maintenance. As she clipped it to her uniform, she felt a pang in her chest. It was little, but was also dignity. She spent the first few hours cleaning the third-floor hallways. Each office had its own scent, a mix of paper, coffee, and air conditioning. She observed the photos on the desks, smiling faces, perfect families, framed diplomas. They reminded her of what she never had time to build. But despite everything, there was peace in her routine. As she scrubbed the floors, she felt that, in some way, the order she restored to the objects also helped her organize her inner self. It was her silent way of resisting. However, everything changed mid-morning. Turning down a litty corridor, she heard a voice that stopped her in her tracks. It was firm, authoritative, impossible to forget. Her body recognized it before her mind did. She turned slowly, like someone afraid to confirm a premonition, and there she saw her, Valeria, standing in front of a group of employees in an impeccable suit, her hair tied back and a severe expression. She was thinner, colder, more distant, but it was her, the daughter she had raised with effort, the same one who once swore she would never be poor. Luz felt the air leave her lungs, not because she expected a hug, but because she understood in a single blow that her daughter did not want to see her. Valeria spoke naturally, as if the woman in the cleaning uniform were just another stranger. Not a word, not a gesture, just a fleeting, uncomfortable glance, the kind used to acknowledge what one wants to hide. In that instant, Luz understood something more painful than any humiliation. Her daughter was ashamed of her. The rest of the day was a constant echo of that scene. As she wiped the desks, she saw her reflection in the glass and wondered when love had turned into distance. She remembered the nights she walked miles to bring food home, the times she lied about eating to leave the plate for her daughter, the winters without heating, the promises that everything would get better someday. And now, all that remained was an awkward silence between two worlds that no longer touched. At quitting time, as the sun set behind the buildings, Luz walked slowly towards the bus stop. Around her, the city seemed to move forward without seeing her. But something inside told her that this encounter had not been a coincidence. Perhaps life had its strange ways of settling scores, of revealing the truths one tries to conceal. That night, upon arriving home, she left the uniform on the bed and looked at it for a long time. She did not know whether to cry or to be grateful, because unknowingly, the story that would change everything had begun. A story that would not be told with sweet words, but with gestures, glances, and painful truths. Luz did not know it yet, but in the following days, life would force her to confront something deeper than poverty or contempt. The final test of a mother's love. If this story touched your heart, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and comment "Mother's Love" so more people can hear it. Valeria was not always the impeccable woman who walked the halls in sharp heels and a commanding expression. There was a time when her hair was tied with old elastic bands and her school uniform had patches sewn on by Luz Marina's hands. But the world she chose to live in did not admit that past. As she grew up and saw that other girls had parents with cars, spacious houses, and vacations, something within her twisted. She didn't want to be known as the cleaner lady's daughter. She wanted to be recognized for her own merit, but along the way she confused success with denial. That's why, when she entered university with a scholarship, she never mentioned her mother. She said she was independent, that she came from another state, that she had struggled alone. She omitted the nights Luz made food to sell to pay for her books. She omitted the fact that she always had a new backpack because her mother bought used ones and restored them. And every time she concealed, her heart became a little harder. Thus, when the company hired her and she found herself finally in an environment of glass, metal, and well-dressed people, she decided that no one there would know she came from a house with cracked walls and clothes drying inside the bathroom. The problem was that life has an almost ironic way of putting everything in its place. The day she saw her mother in the corridor, in a green uniform, a small badge, and a bucket in her hand, Valeria's first impulse was not to run and hug her. It was to quickly look around to see if anyone had noticed the resemblance. Not because she didn't love her mother, but because she was afraid of what that would do to the image she had built with so much effort. Inside her there was a shock. One voice said, "It's your mother." Another said, "No one can know." The second one won. So for the rest of the day, she maintained the manager's posture, talking about goals, reports, important clients, while internally, she felt the shame burning like fire. The most painful thing was that she knew about every sacrifice Luz had made. She knew about the shoes her mother didn't buy for herself, the doctor's appointments she postponed, the birthdays where Luz said, "We don't need a cake this year." But deep down it was because she had no money. She knew everything. And even so, she chose to ignore her. Luz in turn pretended not to notice the disdain. The next day she arrived even earlier and cleaned her daughter's floor with an almost sacred care. It was as if, in some way, she wanted to bless that ground where her girl walked. She didn't want to bother, didn't want to expose, didn't want to cause trouble. She knew that many people, when they rose from poverty, preferred to forget where they came from. And as a mother, she endured it. But the other employees noticed something strange. The new cleaner had the same last name as the manager. The features seemed to share a similar trait: the shape of the face, the color of the eyes. And in the company, where everything becomes gossip, the whispers began. One of the supervisors even commented, innocently, that the new cleaning lady looks like the boss's relative. Valeria heard it. And when she heard it, her shame turned into irritation. Her irritation was not directed at her mother, but at the memory of who she had been. Because the past, when you try to bury it alive, returns stronger. So, instead of calling Luz aside and saying, "Mom, let's keep it discreet," she started treating her as she would treat any employee, considered inferior, with coldness. She corrected small details that didn't even need correction, revised her hours even though it wasn't her job, demanded that she wear a hairnet as the manual stated, and once even asked her to clean a corridor that was already clean, just to make it clear who was in charge there. and Luz obeyed without arguing. Not because she was submissive, but because she understood that her daughter was fighting against something she didn't know how to manage, the shame of her roots. But that wasn't all. In the following days, some of Valeria's colleagues began commenting on how rare it is to see someone rise so high coming from a simple family. One of them, without malice, asked if she had family members working there. Valeria, her face rigid, replied that she did not. At that exact moment, Luz was passing in the background with her bucket. The lie cut through the air like a silent slap. The mother heard it. She pretended not to. She continued to clean, continued to pull the cart, continued to smile at those who asked for toilet paper. But inside, she felt that a line had been cut. It wasn't just that her daughter was ashamed of her. It was that her daughter was erasing her. And being erased hurts more than being criticized. Because criticism acknowledges your existence, but erasure says, you don't exist here. Even so, Luz did not give up. She began doing small things to help her daughter without her knowing. She cleaned Valeria's sector. First, so that everything would be impeccable when the directors arrived. She took care of the plants in her office, discreetly organized the break room so that if someone important came, nothing would look sloppy. It was her way of continuing to be a mother, even without being called mother. And, while doing this, she remembered when Valeria was little and used to say, "Someday I'm going to work in a big building." That's exactly what was happening. Only the girl, now an adult, seemed to have forgotten who guided her there. The tension began to grow like a rope pulled from both sides. Some employees started treating Luz with more kindness, perhaps sensing the injustice. Others, however, imitated the manager's behavior, because in corporate environments, many people copy the behavior of those in power. And if the boss shows contempt, some also show contempt. They started calling her Señora with a false tone, asking for things impatiently, deliberately leaving messes in rooms after meetings, all to test how much she would endure. And she endured, because Luz knew that sometimes enduring is braver than confronting. But what Valeria didn't imagine was that the company had observant eyes. The administrative director, a discreet man who saw more than he spoke, noticed the coincidence of last names and the manager's strange behavior. He noticed how the cleaning lady always excelled in the most visible sector. He also noticed the look of sadness she carried when leaving at the end of the shift. And although he said nothing, he began to put the pieces together. It was only a matter of time before the truth, the one Valeria was trying to hide, came to light publicly. And it was precisely at the moment when Valeria believed she had managed to keep up appearances that something went out of control. A failure in the cleaning schedule, a misinterpreted report, and a meeting room that was not ready to receive an important client. All eyes turned to her, the manager, and to save her own image, she would point downward, to the most fragile link, to the one who, in the eyes of others, had no voice, to the one who, in her eyes, should have remained anonymous. If you want to keep discovering what Luz had to endure and how far her own daughter's shame went, leave your like. Subscribe. The incident occurred on a Thursday morning, just as the building was preparing for an important visit from foreign investors. Everything had to look impeccable, shining floors, dust-free tables, glass clean as mirrors. Luz Marina had been working non-stop since 6 in the morning, making sure every corner of the floor was in order. She checked the bathrooms 3 times, replaced the paper towels, cleaned the elevator fingerprints, and even placed new flowers in the reception area. But a misunderstood internal radio call changed the course of everything. Someone forgot to close one of the meeting rooms after a deep cleaning, and when the visitors arrived, they found the floor damp and a bucket still in the corner. Valeria was there, her nerves taut, watching the company director frown at the mistake. In seconds, her mind searched for a way out. She could have explained that it was a misunderstanding, that the team was overwhelmed, that she herself would take responsibility. But the fear of losing her prestige weighed more. She turned to the cleaning group, and her gaze stopped on the bent figure of Luz Marina, who was wiping the floor a few feet away. Her voice was firm, but loaded with a harshness that concealed panic. The responsible person will be called for immediate attention. She didn't mention names, but everyone understood. Silence fell over the office like a thick fog. Luz slowly raised her head, her hands wet and the mop dripping. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. She knew that this public humiliation was her punishment for existing where she shouldn't. The other employees looked away. Some out of shame, others out of fear of getting involved. And while Valeria continued to speak of protocols and professionalism, her voice cracked just enough to betray what she felt. Shame, yes, but not of the mistake. Shame of her own blood. That day, time stretched. The hours seemed never-ending. Luz continued to clean without lifting her eyes, focused on the smallest details, on the repetitive movement of the mop that, unintentionally, became a comfort. In every movement, she tried to erase not only the moisture from the floor but the pain of what had happened. However, there was something she couldn't clean: the way everyone looked at her. She was no longer just the cleaning lady. Now she was the manager's mother. The secret was half uncovered. That night, when she arrived at her small house, on the outskirts of the city, Luz sat on the bed and let out a long, tired sigh, which sounded more like surrender than relief. She lit a candle on the table, and as she watched the flame, she remembered Valeria's face as a child, with big eyes and a smile that begged, "Stay with me, Mom." At what moment had that smile turned into coldness? When had her daughter learned to look away so as not to see the love that raised her? The weekend passed slowly. Luz didn't want to leave the house. On Monday, however, she returned to work with the same discipline as always, not a word of reproach, not a gesture of resentment. But inside the company, the rumors had grown. The women on the cleaning staff looked at her with a mixture of respect and pity. The office employees with contained curiosity. Some commented that the boss was too hard on her own mother. Others doubted it was true. Valeria noticed everything. Every whisper was an echo of guilt. And although she tried to maintain her composure, the weight of what she had done began to follow her everywhere, like a persistent shadow. Days passed, and little by little, her life began to unravel. Meetings went badly. Projects were delayed. Superiors observed her with less admiration. On her desk, the Employee of the Quarter trophy became an ironic reminder. Not for lack of competence, but because her heart no longer responded with the same certainty. She couldn't see her mother without feeling a knot in her stomach, and she couldn't see her without remembering the scene in front of everyone. It was as if something inside her had definitely broken. Luz, on the other hand, continued with her dignity intact. Although her knees ached and her hands burned from the cleaning products, she never stopped smiling at others. When someone offered help, she replied with a, "Thank you, but I can manage." She knew her daughter was watching her, and without saying it, she wanted to teach her something that is not learned in any university. Value is not in titles, but in how one faces life when no one applauds you. Until one day, while scrubbing the main lobby floors, she heard a loud noise followed by a scream. She turned and saw Valeria falling backward, slipping on a puddle of water that another employee had left unsignposted. In a reflex, Luz dropped the bucket and ran. Her body reacted before her mind. She supported her head just in time, preventing her from hitting the marble. The two remained on the floor, motionless, breathing heavily. Silence enveloped the environment again, but this time there was no shame, only fear. Valeria looked at her for the first time without masks. Her eyes sought her mother's, and something broke inside her. There were no cameras, no witnesses, no hierarchies. Just two lives crossed by a love that had been denied. Luz helped her up without saying a word, checked if she was hurt, and then slowly walked away, as if nothing had happened. But everything had changed. In the following days, the story of the accident spread throughout the company. Everyone knew that it was Luz who prevented the manager from suffering a serious fracture. The director wanted to thank her publicly, but she humbly refused. "I only did what anyone would do." However, not everyone knew the truth hidden behind that silent act, because although no one said it, the loudest rumor became impossible to contain. The woman who saved the manager was her mother, and while Valeria tried to maintain her image, something began to happen inside her. A remorse she couldn't control. The weight of gratitude mingled with shame, and the combination became unbearable. For the first time in years, she didn't know how to look in the mirror. If this story moved your soul, support it with a like, subscribe to the channel, and comment "Mother's Strength" to discover what happens next. After the accident, the atmosphere in the company changed in a subtle but evident way. No one said anything openly, but murmurs floated in the air like dust that cannot be swept away. Employees looked at each other with curiosity, trying to connect the dots. The cleaning woman who saved the manager, the similar features, the same last name. The news spread through the hallways, and within hours everyone knew the truth that Valeria had tried to bury for years. The following Monday, when Valeria entered the building, the greetings were different. Some smiled with a mixture of respect and pity. Others simply looked down. She, who used to walk with her back straight and her voice firm, now did so with short, almost mechanical steps. The air seemed heavier, as if the entire building was watching her. On her desk, she found an unsigned note that read, "Love is not hidden, it is honored." No, one knew who left it, but it was enough to destabilize her. Meanwhile, Luz continued her routine as if nothing had happened. She arrived early, put on her gloves, filled her bucket, and started the day with the same serenity as always. But inside, something had also broken. It was not pride or anger, but a deep sadness. One that is born when you realize that the love you gave was rejected by the one who needed it most. She no longer expected reconciliation or apologies. She only wanted peace. At noon, Valeria received a call from Human Resources. They summoned her to talk about a matter of work environment. Upon entering, she found the CEO sitting in front of the window with a serious expression. In the other chair was Luz, with her hands crossed and her uniform perfectly clean. Valeria felt her heart stop. It was not the place or the time, but she knew it was inevitable. The director spoke in a slow voice. He said that disrespectful treatment was not tolerated in the company, that all employees, regardless of position, deserved respect. He mentioned that comments had been received about her behavior towards the cleaning staff. He did not say names, but every word was direct arrow. Valeria tried to respond but couldn't find the right words. It was useless. Everyone knew. Luz, on the other hand, remained silent. She did not accuse her. She did not defend her. She did not look at her with reproach. She only nodded when the director thanked her for her exemplary work. And when the meeting ended, she calmly stood up, picked up her bag, and left without looking back. That silence was more devastating than any scream. That night, Valeria couldn't sleep. She walked through her elegant apartment, observing the empty walls, the perfectly placed plants, the travel photos, the diplomas. Everything looked orderly, but also cold, lifeless. She turned on the television, but the noise irritated her. She turned it off. She sat in front of the dressing table mirror and saw herself as never before. Tired, alone, empty. For the first time, she understood that her success was worth nothing if she had lost her soul along the way. Days passed, and every time Valeria crossed the hallway where her mother worked, she found her post empty. She discreetly asked one of the cleaning team colleagues, and they replied that Luz had resigned the previous Friday. No one knew why. She only left a letter addressed to the administration. But in the lower corner, handwritten, there was one smaller line. Sometimes love also knows when to leave in silence. Valeria stood there, the paper trembling in her hands. She felt a chill run down her spine. She ran out of the building and called her mother's number, but the phone no longer existed. She went to the old address, but the house was empty, with the windows covered in dust and the door secured with a rusty chain. She asked the neighbors, but no one knew anything. Luz had disappeared, as if the world had swallowed her. The following days were a slow punishment. Every place in the company reminded her of something. The hallway where she first saw her, the elevator where she pretended not to recognize her, the room where she humiliated her. Every corner was a mirror that returned an image she did not want to see. She tried to focus on work, but nothing went right anymore. Her mind was trapped in a single idea. What if it's too late? Weeks passed. One day, Valeria received a sealed letter with no return address. Inside was an old photo, her as a child, with an improvised cake and a smiling woman. Behind her, with flour on her hands. On the back, a phrase written in blue ink. The important thing wasn't the cake. It was seeing you happy. Tears blurred her vision. She collapsed onto the floor, her heart shattered, finally understanding what she had always had and never valued. Since then, every dawn before going to work, Valeria stopped in front of the mirror, took a deep breath and whispered, "I'm sorry, Mom." No one else heard it, but each word seemed to slowly clean the guilt she had accumulated. What she didn't know was that fate still held one more encounter for her, unexpected and decisive, one that would not happen in an office or between shiny walls, but in the simplest and most human place imaginable, a home where humility was still alive. If this story touched your soul, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and comment love and forgiveness to keep discovering the ending no one expects. Winter had arrived with its dry air, and the early morning lights reflected on the steamed-up window of the bus Valeria took to work every day. The empty seat beside her was the same one her mother used to occupy when, years ago, she accompanied her to school. But now that memory felt more distant than ever. Since Luz Marina's disappearance, Valeria had become a shadow of herself. There were no more smiles, no social gatherings, no ambitious goals, only an emptiness that grew with each passing week without news. She tried looking for her in hospitals, churches, shelters, even asked at volunteer centers. No one had seen her. It was as if the world had swallowed her name. And yet, every time Valeria closed her eyes, she heard her voice. Not as a reproach, but as a soft whisper that said, "I'm fine, daughter, don't worry." But those words were not a comfort, but an open wound. 3 months passed. One ordinary morning, while checking a corporate email, Valeria found an invitation to a charity fundraiser organized by a foundation for working women. She almost deleted it unread, but a phrase in the header stopped her. Recognition for silent dedication. Something in those words shook her. She didn't know why, but she felt the need to go. Perhaps because, for the first time, she wanted to look straight at what she had avoided all her life, the value of those who work without applause. The event took place in a community hall. Simple but full of life. There were tables covered with white tablecloths, modest flowers, and a feeling of warmth that Valeria didn't remember feeling in years. She walked among the people, unsure of what she was looking for, observing the faces of older women with calloused hands, of young people with aprons, of old women with sincere smiles. And that's when she saw her. On the stage, a woman with gray hair tied back, a blue uniform, and a serene gaze was receiving an award. The presenter introduced her with a proud voice. An example of effort and dignity. Luz Marina Ochoa. For over 30 years of honest work and service to others. Valeria's world stopped. She felt a tremor run through her body, a mixture of relief, guilt, and joy that almost made her lose her balance. Her mother was alive, thinner, older, but with the same light on her face. That light she had forgotten. Without thinking, she pushed her way through the crowd. Each step was a heartbeat. When she reached the front, Luz saw her. For an instant, her expression clouded over, as if her mind did not want to believe what her eyes were showing. Then, a gentle calm enveloped her. There were no words. They didn't need them. Valeria knelt before her, tears falling uncontrollably, holding the hands she had avoided for so long. Luz looked at her in silence, and in that gesture, everything fit. Forgiveness, love, understanding. There was no reproach, only acceptance. The auditorium fell silent. No one understood what was happening, but everyone felt they were witnessing something sacred. Luz placed her hand on her daughter's face and, with a trembling voice, said the only thing she needed to say. "Get up, daughter. You are forgiven now." The words echoed in the air like an echo that doesn't fade. In that moment, Valeria understood what her mother had always tried to teach her, that greatness is not in positions or titles, but in the ability to love even when one has been hurt. After the event, they walked together through the neighborhood streets, in silence. Valeria offered money, a house, care, anything, to compensate for the lost years. But Luz smiled and shook her head. "I don't need any of that," she said. "Just don't forget who you are." And in that instant, Valeria knew that she would never again allow pride to rob her of her essence. That afternoon, the sun began to set, painting the sky with golden hues. The two women sat on a bench watching the children play across the street. They didn't say much more. It wasn't necessary. For the first time in years, they were at peace. But fate, as always, had one last lesson to give them. A week later, Luz fell ill. A persistent cough turned a fever, and the fever into a diagnosis that seemed to arrive too late. Valeria, determined not to repeat the mistakes of the past, stayed by her side day and night, holding her hand, reading aloud the letters she never dared to send her. And in the midst of the pain, something beautiful began to bloom. Complete reconciliation, the kind that only comes when one chooses to love unconditionally. Because sometimes forgiveness does not change the past, but it transforms the future. If this story moved you, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and comment, "Love heals everything," so you don't miss the end. The sound of the monitors in the hospital became the constant melody of the days that followed. Luz Marina lay in a simple room, with a window through which the soft afternoon light entered. Outside, the wind moved the curtains as if it also wanted to caress her face. Valeria, sitting by her side, held her hand tenderly, fearing that if she let go, time would take her away again. There was no more work, no goals, no schedules, only the desire to recover what was lost. During the first nights, Valeria stayed awake, recalling the moments she had erased from her. Memory, the smell of the bread her mother baked in her childhood, the songs she hummed while cleaning, the hugs that always had the same warmth, even when there was nothing to eat. Now she understood that each of those gestures was a deeper form of love than any word. Luz, though tired, smiled. Frequently. Sometimes she opened her eyes and found her daughter asleep on the bed, her face wet with tears. She watched her in silence and, without moving, barely murmured a thought. "You were late, daughter, but you arrived." She knew her body could no longer withstand much more, but the peace she felt was new, distinct, complete. She had waited for this reunion all her life, and now she had it right in front of her. One afternoon, as the sun began to set, Luz asked for the window to be opened. Valeria did so and sat next to her, holding her hand. The fresh air entered the room, bringing with it the smell of wet earth. Luz breathed deeply, like someone storing the memory of the world in her lungs. Then she turned her head toward her daughter. Her eyes, although weak, still had that clarity that had accompanied her all her life. In a soft voice, she said, "There are things that are only learned when you fall, and you failed to learn to look down, where those who always loved you are." Valeria did not respond. She couldn't. Tears ran down uncontrollably. She wanted to speak, to apologize again, to promise her that she would take care of her forever. But Luz interrupted her with a caress on her face and a slight smile. "Don't say anything. You've already done everything." Silence filled the room. Outside, the city lights began to turn on, one by one. And at that moment, as the day slowly died, Luz Marina closed her eyes for the last time. Valeria felt the last warmth of her mother's hand and understood that even in death, her mother had given her the greatest lesson. The true price of dignity, the strength of humility, and the endless capacity of a mother's love.